The rain in the high peaks of obsidian territory did not fall. It threw itself against the black cliffs like something dying and furious. And Meyerwin stood behind the great doors of the council hall listening because she could not make her feet move. The doors were open, just a hair, just enough. Just enough for gold light to spill across the cold stone floor, and just enough for a voice to reach her, a voice she knew better than her own heartbeat. She had come to bring him tea, that was all. A simple thing. Ginger root and mountain honey the way he liked it after long nights with the council because he never slept enough, and she worried because that was what she did. She healed. She worried. She loved him quietly in the spaces between his duties. She had the cup in her hands, still warm, and she was smiling, until she heard the other voice. "The alliance with the solar pack is everything, Your Majesty." That was Lord Aldrich. Cold, smooth, a voice like oil poured over ice. "You must set aside the healer. She has no lineage, no army, no crown. Princess Ysolde is the only fit mate for the obsidian throne." Merwin did not move. She told herself he would answer. She told herself she knew exactly what he would say, because she knew this man, because only 3 nights ago he had held her face beneath the old weirwood tree and sworn that no crown, no empire, no council could ever take her from him. He had said, "You are the anchor of my soul." He had said, "I would burn the whole kingdom before I let you go." So she waited for the roar. She waited for him to tear that council chamber apart. There was only silence. A long silence, a heavy one, the kind that fills a room the way water fills the lungs of a drowning woman. And then he spoke. "Prepare the ceremony for Princess Ysolde." Vaylor's voice, flat, emptied of everything she had ever heard in it. "Draft the decree. The healer is no longer my concern." The cup did not fall from her hands. That was the strange part, the part she would remember for years. She had always imagined that when a heart broke, the body broke with it, that the hands would open, that the knees would give. But her hands only tightened, around the silver pendant at her throat. The little wolf's head he had given her 3 nights ago warm from his palm. "No longer my concern." 4 words. That was all it took to end a year. She did not cry. The woman she used to be wants me to tell you she cried, but she didn't. She simply reached up and unclasped the pendant and let it fall, one small silver thing against the great cold stone, and it made a sound so quiet that no one inside heard it. Then she turned, and she walked out into the rain. She did not say goodbye. There was no one to say it to, was the truth of it. No mother waiting, no sister. Her grandfather 12 years in the ground. She had built her whole small life inside the walls of that citadel, the clinic, the herb garden, the man on the throne, and now every piece of it belonged to someone else. So she walked, down through the lower town, where the lanterns hissed and guttered in the wet, past the outer stables where the horses shifted and blew steam into the dark, down the mountain pass where the mud was thick and cold and pulled at her boots like grasping hands, because the mountain did not want to let her go either. Neither did the thing inside her chest. The mate bond. You have to understand what that is for a wolf. It is not love exactly. Love is a choice a person makes with the daylight parts of themselves. The bond is deeper and older and lives in the marrow. For 12 months it had hummed inside her, warm and golden, a second heartbeat set beside her own. And now it bled. Every step down that mountain it tore a little further, a slow and merciless unstitching, and Meyerwin pressed her hand flat against her ribs, as if she could hold the wound shut from the outside. She could not. The rain drove sideways. Her cloak, threadbare wool, the same one she'd worn for 6 winters, soaked through in minutes, and she thought with a small hysterical clarity, "I am the chief healer of the Obsidian Pack, and I do not even own a good cloak." Which was, she supposed, the whole story, wasn't it? She had spent her life serving them. She knew which herb quieted a fever, and which one stopped a hemorrhage, and which one ground fine and slipped under the tongue could ease a dying elder into sleep without pain. She had brought their children into the world with her own 2 hands. She had sat up through the long nights of their wars, sewing their soldiers back together. And to the council she was nothing, a commoner, a distraction, a woman without a name worth writing down. No lineage, no army, no crown. She stopped at the tree line. The whispering woods, the black boundary between the Lycan lands and the neutral territories beyond. The old pines loomed over her, dripping, silent, watching. She did not look back at the citadel, because she knew herself. She knew that if she turned, if she saw even one amber window glowing warm against the storm, she would fold. She would go back. She would stand in that throne room and beg for whatever scraps of him she was allowed to keep, and she would spend the rest of her life being grateful for them. No, her pride would not allow it. Her survival would not allow it. And there was one more thing. 3 days ago, in the gray light before dawn, she had pressed her palm flat to her own belly and felt it the smallest flicker. A second life. A heartbeat that was not her own and not his either, but something made between them, something the council did not know about and now never would. She would not raise a child in a court that despised its mother. She would not let that small, fluttering thing grow up watching its father discard them for a treaty and a foreign crown. So she stepped into the trees, and the woods closed behind her like a door. Now, let me take you back inside that castle, because there is a thing you deserve to know. A thing Meyerwin did not know standing in the rain, and it will make everything that comes after hurt in a different way. Valor was lying, high in the royal chambers. When the council had gone, the king of the obsidian pack stood at the great arched window with his hands braced against the stone, watched the storm swallow the mountain, and waited for the sickness to pass. It did not pass. His chest seized. A sharp, ripping spasm tore straight through his heart, and he gasped, and his knees went out from under him, and the most feared alpha in 3 territories folded to the floor of his own chamber like a man shot through. The bond had gone cold, not distant, not dimmed, cold like a hearth in a house where everyone has died. Where there had been warmth for 12 months, there was now a numbness so total it frightened him more than any wound. Meyerwin, he said to no one. He knew what he had done. That was the thing that would rot him from the inside for the next 6 years. He knew exactly what he had done. The decree was a trap, a lie he had built with his own hands, precise as a surgeon's cut. His uncle Aldrich had the council in his fist, and Aldrich had already, Valor was almost certain of it, poisoned the old King Valor's father in his sleep. The moment Valor claimed Merwin openly as his mate, the council would move against her. There was a warrant already drafted. High treason. A commoner reaching above her station poisoning the royal line. They would twist it however they liked, and they would have her executed before the moon turned. So he had lied. He had stood before those cold old men and said the cruelest words he could invent, because a cruel king is a safe king, and a safe king cannot be a lover, and a man with no lover has no throat to cut. He had done it to protect her. That was the story he told himself. But here is the truer thing, the thing he would not admit aloud for a long, long time. When the choice came in that room with the council's eyes on him and the crown's weight on his skull, some small and frightened part of him had chosen the throne first, had reached for safety, had let the words come out just a breath too smoothly. He had meant to send for her that same night. He had a plan. Bramwell, his most loyal beta, would go to her quarters, explain everything, escort her in secret to a safe house in the southern valley where Aldrich's reach did not extend. 3 days. He needed only 3 days to secure the border packs and break his uncle's hold, and then he would bring her home and crown her himself and let the whole rotten council choke on it. 3 days. He had gambled 3 days against a lifetime. Sire, Bramwell in the doorway, and his face was wrong, his face was gray. We've searched the clinic, the lower town, the stables. Lady Merwin, she's gone. Valor rose from the floor very slowly. Gone. He said the word like he did not know it. Her quarters are stripped, her journals, her instruments, her grandfather's grimoire, the old book, sire, the one she never let out of her sight. All of it gone. Bramwell held out his hand, and his hand was shaking. We found this, outside the council doors. On his palm lay the silver pendant, the little wolf's head. The chain snapped clean through. Valor did not take it. He looked at it, and the whole architecture of his careful, clever plan came down inside him all at once, silent and total like a mountain of glass. She had been there. She had stood outside those doors and heard every word. She had heard the healer is no longer my concern, and she had not stayed to learn. It was a lie because why would she? Because he had built the lie to be believed and she had believed it, and the thing he had made to save her had driven a blade straight through the center of her. His wolf howled inside him, trapped, frantic, throwing itself against the walls of his mind. "You fool," he whispered, and it was not to Bramwell. "You arrogant, careful fool." "Should I send the trackers?" Bramwell asked quietly. "The solar delegation arrives at dawn, No." There was something in Valor's voice then low and terrible that made the beta go still. "The trackers will frighten her, and she knows how to mask her scent mountain sage. She taught half the clinic to do it. If she's gone into the whispering woods, they'll lose her the moment she reaches the iron root trees." He closed his hand around empty air. "I'll find her myself. If I have to tear down every border wall in this kingdom, I will bring my mate home." And beyond the doorway in the shadow of the stone gallery, someone was smiling. Lord Aldrich stood in the dark, where the torchlight did not reach, and he listened to his nephew's grief the way another man might listen to good music. His gray eyes glinted. The healer was gone. The king's heart was broken clean through. And the throne of the obsidian crest, the throne that should have been his, that had been denied him his whole life, for the one thing he could not change, was suddenly gloriously within his reach. You should know about Aldrich. It matters later. He had not always been cruel. Somewhere deep and buried was a boy who had been laughed out of the great hall because his mother was a laundress, a commoner, a woman without a name, worth writing down. The same words, the very same words that had just been spoken over Meyerwen. That boy had learned a hard lesson young, that in this kingdom blood was everything, and mercy was for those who already had it. So he had decided in the cold private rooms of his own heart that if the world would judge him by blood, then he would take the highest blood there was. He would sit on the throne that had scorned him, and he would prove to the ghost of every noble who had ever looked through him that a commoner's son could rule them all. It was almost the same wound Merwin carried. He had simply let it turn to poison. 6 years very nearly is a long time. Long enough for a wound to close. Long enough for a girl who fled into the woods with nothing but a wool cloak and a book and a secret to become someone else entirely. The town was called Oak Haven. It sat in the neutral territories in the low green country, where humans and rogue wolves and folk of no pack at all lived together in a truce that was old and tired and mostly held. A river ran through it, a market square, a well with a bucket that squeaked. And on the eastern edge, where the last houses gave way to meadow, stood a small stone clinic that smelled of lavender and dried chamomile and crushed eucalyptus. And everyone for 40 miles knew whose it was. The Star Witch of Oak Haven. That was what they called her now, half in awe and half in affection, because her remedies could break the worst of the winter-rot fever, and because the wards she wove around the town kept the borderland gangs from ever crossing the river. Mothers brought her their sick children. Old men brought her their aching bones. She took what they could pay, an egg, a coin, a jar of honey, and turned no one away. She was not the frightened girl who had run from the citadel. She was fierce now, and settled and sure of her own 2 hands. But she was still afraid of one thing. "Mama, look, I made a star." Meyerwind turned from her mortar and pestle, and there perched on the tall stool by the wide bay window, small heels drumming against the wood, sat the whole reason she got out of bed in the morning. Nissa, 5 years old, silver-white hair falling loose around a face that was Meyerwind's own, mostly the same stubborn chin, the same wide mouth. Except for the eyes. Because the eyes were not hers. Between the child's small cupped hands floated a little globe of light. Soft, silver blue, spinning slow. It was Merwin's own magic, the starcraft passed down her grandfather's line, and any other day it would have made her smile. Except that as Nissa laughed with delight at her own cleverness, her eyes flared. Not the soft violet of Merwin's craft. Gold. Liquid, molten, unmistakable gold. The royal gold of the obsidian crest. Meyerwind's heart seized the way it always did, and she crossed the floor faster than she meant to, and she folded her daughter's small hands, gently closed around the light until it winked out. "What have I told you?" she said softly, "about your magic near the window? That people on the road can't see." Nissa's lip pushed out. 5 years old, and already she knew how to look wounded. "But why, Mama, I want to be strong. Like you. Like the warriors in the stories. You are strong, my love." Myrwen knelt. She kissed the warm crown of her daughter's head, and she breathed her in pine and chamomile, and something sweeter underneath something that had always from the first day smelled faintly of a mountain she had left behind. "Stronger than you know. But in Oak Haven, careful comes first. The world out there is complicated." "You always say that." "Because it's always true." Nissa considered this with the deep gravity of the very young. Then she brightened the wound forgotten and reached for the little carved wolf she carried everywhere, gray wood, one ear chipped, loved half to death. "Tell me the story again. The one about the Silver King." Merwin's hands went still on her daughter's shoulders. She had made that mistake once. Long ago, tired, aching with a loneliness she didn't have a name for, she had told her small daughter a bedtime story about a king with golden eyes and a heart like a locked room. She had never meant to tell it twice. And she had told it by now 100 times, because the child asked, because the child did not know she was asking her mother to press on a bruise. "Not tonight," Merwin said gently. "Tonight you have chores. Who's going to sort the dried sage for me?" "Me," said Nissa, sliding off the stool. And the moment passed the way. The dangerous moments always passed quietly, unremarked, folded away into an ordinary afternoon. For a while there was peace. The girls sorted sage into little cloth bundles, humming. The mother ground willow bark for a widow's aching knees. The light came golden and slow through the bay window, and the river squeaked its distant bucket, and it might have been any of 2,000 afternoons in a life carefully, deliberately, lovingly kept small. It could not last. You know it could not last. Stories like this one never let a woman keep her peace. Because the bell above the door rang. Myrwen looked up. The wooden bell over the heavy oak door swung and chimed, and a draft came in cold and wrong, carrying a scent that did not belong to the low green country. Pine. Rich mountain loam. And underneath it, unmistakable to anyone who had ever lived among wolves, the sharp, aggressive musk of an obsidian pack male. Her hand moved before her mind did. Down. To the silver dagger sheathed beneath her apron, the one she had carried every single day for 6 years and prayed she would never need. Her body moved too, sliding sideways, putting herself squarely between the door and the small silver head bent over the sage. "Can I help you, traveler?" Her voice came out cool, level, a stranger's voice. She was proud of it. The man in the doorway was tall and heavily cloaked and travel-stained, and he stood very still, the stillness of a man who has ridden a long, long way and has just at the end of it seen something he did not dare hope to find. He pushed back his hood, and Myrwen's careful, level stranger's voice died in her throat, because she knew that face, older now, scarred with a life she had not shared, but she knew it. Bramwell, V. Haller's beta. The man who had 6 years ago been sent to her quarters with an explanation she never stayed to hear. His eyes moved over her, the woman he'd searched half the world for, and then dropped past her to the child behind her skirts. To the silver hair, to the small hand clutching a chipped wooden wolf, and whatever color was left in his weathered face drained clean away. "By the mother," he breathed. He actually fell back a step, one hand catching the doorframe. "Myrwen, 6 winters we've searched. You have the wrong clinic." She did not blink. Her hand did not leave the dagger. "I'm an herbalist. If you've a winter cough, name it. If not, the door's behind you." He hasn't slept. Bramwell took a slow step in both hands, rising open empty. The oldest gesture there is. I mean no harm. Not one whole night, not since the morning you left. He made his choice. There was no wedding, Myrwen. The words landed in the small, warm room like a stone through glass. She heard herself say distantly, "What?" "The solar treaty. It was never sealed. He never took Princess Isolde." Bramwell's voice dropped low and urgent, and his eyes flicked to the child and back. "The moment you vanished, he called off the ceremony. In front of the whole council. The words you heard through that door, they were a lie. He built it to save your life. and it cost him yours instead." Marwan did not lower the dagger, but something moved behind her eyes. A tremor deep down in the foundation she had spent 6 years laying stone by stone. "No," she said, and then again quieter as if saying it twice would make it hold. "No. He stood in that room and he said I was no longer his concern." I heard the words leave his mouth. Whatever reason he had, a reason is not the same as staying. A reason does not put a father in this house. A reason does not sit up at night when the fever comes and there is no one to hold the other side of the child. "Meyerwin, you should go." And that was when the door came off its hinges. It did not open. It exploded, kicked inward off its iron hinges with a splintering crack that filled the whole clinic, and 3 shapes poured through the ruin of it, huge and cloaked and moving fast. Their eyes were red. Not the amber of a wolf, not the gold of the crest. Red, the sick feral burning red of rogues who have severed their own bonds and traded them to something dark for power. They did not look at Meyerwen. They did not look at Bramwell. Their eyes went straight to the child. "The girl," the lead one snarled, and a curved silver blade came out of his cloak, catching the last of the golden light. "Take the girl, kill the rest." The next few seconds happened all at once, the way violence always does. Bramwell's sword was already out, 6 years a warrior, faster than thought, and he stepped into the first rogue with a crash of steel that shattered a shelf of glass jars and lavender and comfrey, and blue powders burst across the floor in a choking cloud. Meyerwen run the back door. But Meyerwen was not running, because Meyerwen was not the girl who had wept in the mountain mud 6 years ago. 6 winters of guarding a border town had made her into something else, and now that something else moved, she slammed both hands flat on the counter, and she called the herbs. The dried bundles hanging from the rafters, 6 years of pepper root and sleeping dust and eye-stinging sage, everything she had ever hung up to dry, burst all at once into a blinding, burning storm. The whole room filled with glowing amber fog, thick as smoke, and the rogues staggered, choking blind. "Nisa." Merwin's voice cut through the chaos, and it did not shake. "The floor, now." The child had frozen wide gold eyes, huge in the fog, but she moved. Small and quick and obedient, she dove for the rug, for the hidden cellar hatch beneath it, that they had practiced over and over 100 quiet drills disguised as a game. If the bad thing ever comes, you go under. And you stay, no matter what you hear. The hatch swallowed her. Just as the second rogue cleared Bramwell's guard and lunged, Meyerwen turned into the strike instead of away from it. Her grandfather had taught her that, of all things, an old healer, who somehow knew how to fight, and the silver dagger flashed up and drew a long line across the rogue's forearm. Not deep. It didn't need to be deep. The blade was coated in nightshade ground and thickened and painted along the steel, and the rogue's arm simply stopped working, the muscles locking, and he went down hard and did not get up. 2. But the third had used the fog. The third was patient. He came out of the amber cloud behind her, and a scarred arm wrapped around her throat and hauled her back against a chest like a wall. "Tell me where the brat is." Which? Hot breath at her ear, cold steel at her throat. "Or I open you up right here." "Let her go." Bramwell, but the lead rogue had him pinned to the wall, now sword arm bound in a silver-weighted net, and he could not reach her. And Meyerwen, with a blade at her throat, and her daughter 3 feet below her in the dark, had one clear, cold thought, and the thought was, I did not run this far. I did not build this whole life out of ashes, for it to end in my own clinic with my child under the floor. She never got to find out what she would have done, because the world changed. It came down over Oak Haven like a weight dropped from the sky. Pressure, enormous, silent crushing. The air in the clinic seemed to turn to freezing glass all at once. The stone foundation of the building groaned, actually groaned, as though the earth itself had grown suddenly heavier, and every candle in the room guttered and died. The rogue holding her went rigid. His grip on her throat slackened. Not by choice, she felt it. Felt the animal in him seize up in pure and helpless terror, and his red eyes rolled toward the ruined doorway, and his breath came out in a whimper. Because a shape was filling that doorway, huge, cloaked in the black fur of a northern bear, and where the face should have been shadowed, 2 points of light burned instead 2 eyes of pure molten terrible gold. Valor stepped into the ruin of her clinic. He did not look at the rogues. He did not look at his bleeding beta still pinned against the wall. The weight of him, the sheer dominance rolling off him in waves, drove the 2 conscious rogues to their knees on the broken glass, their bodies shaking, unable to rise against a will that old and that strong. He looked at her. Only at her. And the bond that had bled out on a mountainside 6 years ago and had lain cold and scarred and silent every single day since the bond roared back to life. It came up through the center of her like a struck bell, like a wave, like a fire catching dry wood, and Myrwen gasped aloud with the shock of it. She had told herself it was dead. She had needed it to be dead. And it was not dead. It had only been sleeping, and now it was awake and screaming, and gold in the air between them, a visible current crackling, filling the ruined room with the smell of ozone and sweet mountain sage. He crossed the room. The rogue at her throat scrambled back from him on hands and heels forgotten, and Valor stopped an arm's length away from her, close enough that she could see the 6 years written on his face, the new scar running temple to jaw, the weight of a war he'd fought alone, and he said one word, her name, Myrwen, just that. And in that single word was every night he hadn't slept, and every mile he'd ridden, and every cold morning he'd woken reaching for a warmth that wasn't there. She stood there with her heart slamming against her ribs and her dagger still in her fist, and she looked at the man who had broken her, the man who had apparently spent 6 years breaking himself, and she found that she had waited 6 years to say something to him, and she still in the end only had the truth. "You're older," she said. "So are you." His voice cracked on it. His eyes moved over her face like a starving man over bread. You're here. You're real. I'd started to think, don't." He stopped. "You don't get to look at me like that." Her voice shook, and she hated that it shook, and she pushed through it anyway, because 6 years had taught her that you can be afraid and still stand up straight. "You don't get to walk into my town and my home and my life 6 years late and look at me like I'm the thing you lost. I'm not lost. I was never lost. I knew exactly where I was every single day. It was you who couldn't find your way to the truth in time. Myrwen, I can explain the decree the Council Aldrich. It was a trap I built it to. I know what it was." She hadn't meant to say it. It came out of her raw. "Your man told me, just now, before the door came down." She swallowed. "You built a beautiful lie to save my life. And it worked. Congratulations. I'm alive. And so is—" She stopped. She stopped so hard and so completely that Valor's whole body went still the way an animal goes still listening. Because from beneath the floorboards, muffled, small, and unbearably brave, came a voice. "Mama." A pause. A tiny indrawn breath. "Is the scary man gone?" The whole room seemed to hold still. V. Haller's head turned. Slowly. So slowly. His golden eyes traveled down past Merwin to the rug crumpled against the wall to the hatch beneath it, and Merwin saw the exact moment the scent reached him. Saw his nostrils flare. Saw something move across his face that she had no word for, some collision of hope and terror and disbelief so total it looked almost like pain. Pine. Sweet chamomile. And under it, threaded all the way through it, unmistakable to the one man in all the world who would know it, the scent of his own blood. "Myrwen," he said, and his voice was not a king's voice anymore. It was barely a voice at all. "Myrwen, who is under that floor?" She stepped in front of the hatch. She put her whole body between him and it, the dagger up, 6 years of fierce and lonely motherhood rising in her like a tide. And she looked the king of the obsidian pack dead in his golden eyes, and she said the only thing there was to say. "Mine." The word rang out in the ruined room. "She's mine. Do you understand me? You have no claim here. She was born in the dark of the borderlands. She was raised on herb money and river water. She has never once heard the name of the father who let her mother walk into the rain." Myrwen's voice broke finally on the last of it, and she let it break because some things are true enough to be worth breaking over. "So you can turn around Valor. You can go back to your throne and your council and your war. The weak little healer you threw away 6 years ago is dead, and I have no room in my life for a king. and outside through the broken door. The rain came down over Oak Haven, softer now, but steady, the way rain settles in when it means to stay all night. And beneath the floor in the dark, a small girl with golden eyes held very still and clutched a chipped wooden wolf to her chest and listened to two voices she did not yet understand, deciding the shape of the whole rest of her life. For a long moment, no one in the ruined clinic moved. The rain filled the silence. The two conscious rogues still knelt on the broken glass, pinned by a will they could not fight. Bramwell stood with his sword arm bleeding. The herb fog thinned in the air, settling slow gold and dying. And Valor stood before the woman he had lost, and the floor she was guarding with her body, and he did the one thing Myrwen had never once in 6 years of imagining this exact impossible moment prepared herself for. He knelt. Not to her, not exactly. He went down to the ruined floor, slow, careful, a mountain of a man folding himself small, and he set his hands flat on the boards near the hatch, and he did not reach for it. He just knelt there, beside it, and waited. "I won't open it," he said, quietly, to the wood, to the child he could not see. "I won't touch it. I don't have—" His voice failed him. He gathered it up again. "I don't have the right." Merwin watched him and did not lower the dagger. Because this was worse somehow. This was so much worse than if he had roared, if he had commanded, if he had thrown his weight around the way kings do. She knew how to stand against a king. She had built a whole life out of standing against kings. She did not know how to stand against a man on his knees on her clinic floor saying, "I don't have the right." "Nisa," Merwin said. Her eyes never left Valor. "The bad thing is over, sweetheart. You can come up now, slow." The hatch lifted, and a small silver head rose out of the dark, and two enormous golden eyes came up over the edge of the floor, and of course they went straight to the stranger kneeling 3 feet away. Two pairs of golden eyes, the exact same gold, meeting across the ruin of a clinic in a border town, 6 years and a whole broken kingdom away from where it started. And Valor made a sound. It was not a word. It came up out of the deepest part of him from underneath the war and the crown and the 6 years of iron control, and it was the sound a man makes when the thing he has grieved turns out to be alive. Low, cracked, almost a whimper. His whole enormous frame shook with it, and he pressed one hand hard over his own mouth as if to hold himself together, and above that hand his eyes filled and spilled over silver, tracking down the new scar on his cheek. "She has my mother's hair," he whispered, behind his hand, to no one, to everyone. "Myrwen, my mother had that hair, silver since she was a girl. There's a portrait in the North Gallery I used to—" He couldn't finish it. Nissa, half out of the floor, looked at this enormous weeping stranger with the frank and fearless curiosity of the very young, and then she looked up at her mother, and she asked the question that broke what was left of the room. "Mama, why is the big man crying?" And Myrwen, fierce, Myrwen, guarded Myrwen, who had promised herself 100 times that she would never let this man near her child, heard herself say, in a voice gone thin as paper, because he thought he lost something, a long time ago. Did he find it? The clinic was very quiet. "Yes," Merwin said. "He did." They could not stay in Oak Haven. That much was plain before the fog had even cleared. The rogues who'd come through her door had not been random. Bramwell, binding his own forearm with a strip torn from his cloak, was the one who said it aloud, that the cloaks of the dead and paralyzed men on her floor carried a scent under the road dust and the blood, a scent he knew sharp and gold and cold, the solar pack, which meant the enemy already knew about Nissa, which meant the little clinic on the eastern edge with its wards and its herbs, and its careful small peace was no longer a haven at all. It was a marked house, a trap already sprung once and sure to spring again. "You cannot stay here," Valor said. He had risen from the floor. He kept a careful distance from the child, from Myrwen, from all of it, a man moving very slowly around a thing he was terrified of breaking. "If they've found this place, they'll come back with more. Next time I might not—" "Might not what?" Merwin turned on him. "Might not happen to be riding through the neutral territories in the exact hour 3 rogues kicked down my door. You want me to believe that was luck?" He held her eyes. No, it wasn't luck. I've had riders combing these territories for 6 years. When one of them caught your scent on a trade road 2 days ago, I didn't send Bramwell ahead. I didn't send anyone. I came myself. His jaw worked. I always came myself. She looked away first, which she hated. That doesn't fix anything, she said. I know. You say I know like it's an answer. It isn't an answer. 6 years, Valor. She lost teeth. She had the winter fever twice, and both times I sat up alone with a bowl of cold water and a candle and a book of my grandfather's, and I did not know if she would see morning. Where were you? You want to tell me about riders and rumors. Where were you when she was 2 years old and burning up in my arms, and I was so frightened I couldn't see? He had no answer to that. That was the thing she would remember, that he did not reach for one. A lesser man would have. A lesser man would have said, I didn't know, would have said, it wasn't my fault, would have tried to hand the weight of it back to her. Valor just stood there in the wreck of her clinic and took it. The whole terrible truth of it. Took it like a blow he had earned and would not dodge. I can't give you those years, he said finally. I would give my throne for them. I would give my life for them. But they're gone, and nothing I say tonight buys them back, and I'm not going to insult you by pretending it does. He drew a slow breath. So I'm not going to ask you to forgive me. I'm going to ask you to let me keep you both alive. That's all. Tonight. That's the only thing I'm asking for. And Maerwyn, who had spent 6 years hardening herself against exactly this man, felt the first stone shift in the wall she'd built. She did not let him see it. But it shifted. They rode for the citadel through the mountain passes, and it took 3 days, and I will not pretend those 3 days were tender. They were not. They were awkward and raw and full of long silences, and Myrwen held herself apart the whole way with a stubbornness that Bramwell 6 years the king's beta, and no fool privately admired more than he would ever say. She rode in a covered carriage with Nissa. Valor rode ahead on his black warhorse at the head of the column, his golden eyes always moving across the tree line. He did not press. He did not crowd. He kept his distance the way a man keeps distance from a fire he's been burned by once already, and every evening when they made camp, he sent food to her carriage first, the best of it, and he never once came to eat it with her. It was Nissa who broke it. Of course it was Nissa. Because a 5-year-old does not know how to hold a grudge across a mountain range. Because a 5-year-old sees a very large man with sad eyes who happens to have eyes exactly like her own, and a 5-year-old gets curious. On the second night, Myrwen came back from the stream to find her daughter sitting cross-legged by the fire, gravely showing the king of the obsidian pack how her chipped wooden wolf could, if you held it just right, howl at the moon. Valor was holding the wolf. This enormous scarred war king, who had that very afternoon put down a solar scout with his bare hands, was holding a battered gray toy up to the sky and making it badly, terribly, with the self-conscious clumsiness of a man who has never once in his life done such a thing, howl. No, Nissa was instructing him, deeply unimpressed. Not like that, like this. And she took the wolf back and demonstrated a howl so piercing that 2 of the guards flinched. Ah, said Valor with total seriousness. I see. I've been doing it wrong for years. You've never done it before. That's true. You're bad at it. I am extremely bad at it. Nissa considered him. Then she handed the wolf back. You can practice, she said, magnanimous. 5 years old, granting a king the greatest gift she had. I'll teach you. And Myrwen stood at the edge of the firelight where neither of them could see her, and pressed her hand over her mouth, and felt 6 years of certainty come apart in her chest like wet paper. She had spent all this time telling herself a story. That he was a king first and always. That the crown had chosen for him once, and would choose for him again. That whatever he'd felt for her had been the kind of thing a powerful man could set down when it grew inconvenient. And she watched him fail to make a toy wolf howl for the delight of a 5-year-old, and she thought, oh no, he's real, he was always real, and that's so much worse. The obsidian citadel had not changed. That was the cruel thing about coming home to a place that broke you. The black iron gates were the same, the spires clawing up into the gray sky were the same. Even the smell of the place, cold stone torch smoke, The particular sharp mountain air reached into Merwin through the carriage window and pulled 6 years of scar tissue clean off in a single breath. But the courtyards were not empty. Word had run ahead of them the way word always does. The rumor of the healer's return of the silver-haired child of the bastard Princess Aldrich's people had been busy, and the whispers had already curdled into something ugly. The upper courtyards were packed with wolves, hundreds of them come to see the stray who dared come back. Merwin stepped down from the carriage with Nissa's hand held tight in hers. She had dressed for this. Not in finery, she had no finery, and would not have worn it if she had. A plain gown of midnight wool. Her silver hair braided back and bound with a few small frozen mountain lilies. The only ornament she'd allowed herself, because they grew wild along the passes, and they reminded her that she had crossed those passes once alone and lived. She did not look at the sneering noblewomen. She did not look at the elder alphas with their low, suspicious growls. She lifted her chin, and she walked and she moved through that hostile courtyard with the bearing of a woman who has already survived the worst thing these people could do to her, because she had. "Look at her," a woman whispered behind a jeweled hand. "The stray thinks she can walk these halls. No pack, no name, no blood." Another voice. "A plague on the court." V. Haller was at her side in an instant, his shoulder a wall between her and the crowd. "They respect strength," he murmured low for her alone. "And blood. Don't let them see you falter." "I crossed these mountains in the dark with nothing," Merwin said, not slowing, not looking at him, her voice like cold iron. "Alone, carrying her. These pampered court wolves do not frighten me, Valor. They never did. That was always their mistake." And something in his face when she said it, some flash of fierce and painful pride, told her he had waited 6 years to hear her talk like that again. The welcoming banquet was a trap dressed as a feast, and everyone in the great hall knew it. The council sat in their stone tiers, grim and unmoving. The iron chandeliers threw a hard light down over long tables, over roast meat. No one was eating over a room so thick with tension you could have cut it and served it on a plate. And at the center of the head table, in the place of honor, sat a woman with red gold hair and green eyes, and a smile like a knife left out in the frost. Princess Isolde of the Solar Pack. Meyerwin knew her by reputation, the way you know a storm, by the color of the sky. This was the woman Valor had been meant to marry, the woman whose alliance the council had valued above a healer's whole life. And here she sat at the obsidian table 6 years after the wedding that never happened, which was, when Meyerwin let herself think about it, a very strange thing indeed. Because why would she be here? If Valor had humiliated her before the whole court 6 years ago, called off the ceremony, sent her home, why was the jilted solar princess sitting at the obsidian king's table now smiling like she owned it? "File that away," said the healer, part of Merwin's mind, the part that had learned to read a wound by the color at its edges. "That's not right. That's a symptom of something." "Welcome home, Lady Merwin." Isolde lifted a silver goblet in a toast that was all teeth. "We were so saddened by your sudden departure all those years ago, so cowardly we all thought, to vanish in the night, and to a human village of all places, raising a child of such questionable origins." The hall went quiet to listen. Merwin set down the cup she had not been drinking from. "My daughter's origins aren't in question, Princess." Her voice carried easy and clear across the whole silent room. "The moon goddess made her. Not a treaty, not a signed page bought to keep a kingdom safe. She let that land." "But I understand the confusion. It must be hard to tell the difference when you've only ever known the second kind of bond." The court gasped. Isolde's smile cracked straight down the middle. Her claws came out, dug 4 little grooves into the polished wood of the table, and for just 1 second, one single second, the green eyes flashed with something that was not anger. It was fear. Merwin saw it and did not understand it. Not yet. "Enough." The voice came from the council tier, cold, smooth, oil over ice, and Meyerwin's whole body went rigid before she even turned, because she knew that voice. She had heard that voice through a crack in a door 6 years ago, telling a king to throw her away. Lord Aldrich rose from his seat. "I was older too. They all were." But where the years had carved suffering into Valor's face, they had carved something else into Aldrich's, a kind of smooth, patient, terrible certainty. The look of a man who has been waiting a very long time and can feel the waiting finally coming to an end. The child's claim will be tested, Aldrich said, as law demands. The trial of the blood moon. 3 nights from now before the full council. She will touch the moonstone in the sacred temple. If the stone accepts her, she is of the royal blood, and no one here may speak against her again. He smiled, and it did not reach his gray eyes. And if it rejects her as a false claim, must then the girl is banished to the wastes, and this whole sad matter is finally mercifully closed. No! Valor was on his feet, and his aura flared, and every goblet in the hall rang. My daughter does not touch that stone. She's a child. The moonstone's raw energy could what nephew, Aldrich's voice was silk, could harm her only if she is not what her mother claims. The true blood does not burn. You know this. Every child of the crest has passed the trial since the founding. The gray eyes slid to Merwin. Unless, of course, you have reason to fear the stone. Do you, healer? Do you fear what the moon goddess will say about your daughter's blood? The whole hall looked at her, and Merwin understood in that moment exactly what kind of trap she was standing in. If she refused the trial, she was admitting Nissa was a fraud, and they would take her, and there was nothing Valor's crown could do about it. It was ancient law older than the throne itself. And if she accepted, she was letting these people put her 5-year-old daughter's hand on a stone that could, if it turned against her, burn the mind right out of her small skull. She looked at Aldrich, and Aldrich, sure of his victory, made the smallest mistake. He let her see him enjoy it. There you are, Merwin thought. There's the wound under all that silk. You want this too badly, which means you've planned for it too carefully, which means the stone isn't the danger. You are. She did not refuse. She did not flinch. She stepped forward out from behind Valor's protecting shoulder, and she spoke to the whole council, her voice ringing off the high stone. I accept the trial. Merwin, Valor's hand caught her arm. I accept it, she said again louder over him to Aldrich. My daughter will touch the moonstone before the full council. But I set one condition, and by the same ancient law you love so well you cannot refuse it. Aldrich's smile thinned. Name it. The sanctuary where she waits the night before the trial will be sealed with a blood ward, keyed to the temple maidens and to the king's own blood, and to no one else. If any other soul enters that chamber before the trial, any soul at all, the ward will scream through the whole citadel, and it will be witnessed by all, and it will be named for exactly what it is. She held his gray eyes. An act of treason against a child. The hall was silent, and Aldrich's smile faltered, just for a breath, just for the length of a single heartbeat, but Merwin saw it because she had been watching for it, because she had known the moment he looked too pleased that his plan required getting to the child in the dark. She had just locked the door. A reasonable request, Aldrich said. Smooth again. The mask back in place. The council agrees. 3 nights healer. We ride the girl to the sacred temple at dawn on the 3rd day. He sat. And Merwin, having just won, felt the cold truth of it settle into her bones, that she had not diffused the trap. She had only forced it to change shape. That night, she could not sleep, and so she did what she always did when the fear got too loud. She opened her grandfather's grimoire. She had carried it out of the citadel 6 years ago, wrapped in her only spare shift. She had read it 1,000 times since by candlelight, in the little clinic teaching herself the starcraft that ran in her blood. She knew its pages the way she knew her daughter's face, except that tonight, in a guest chamber high in the citadel that had thrown her away by the light of a single candle. Merwin turned to a page near the back, a page she had read 100 times and never truly read, because she had never before read it here in this place, with these stones around her. It was a page about the founding, about the first wolves of the Obsidian Crest, and about the ones who came before them, the star mages, the old bloodline, the ones who had woven the first wards and set the first stones, and then faded out of the histories until they were nothing but a line in a children's tale. And there, in her grandfather's cramped, familiar hand, was a passage she had read 100 times and understood for the first time. The star blood does not come from the outside. It comes down, through the mothers, quiet and hidden and skipping the generations that do not need it until the hour of great need calls it up again. Through the mothers. Merwin sat very still. Her grandfather had taught her the starcraft. She had always thought it was a thing he'd learned, a scholar's art, a healer's trick passed hand to hand. But it wasn't taught. You could not teach it. She had tried in Oakhaven, tried to show a clever apprentice, the smallest working, and the girl had no more been able to call the silver light than she could have called down the moon. It didn't come from study, it came down, through the mothers, which meant her grandfather had not learned it. He had carried it, and passed it to her the only way it could be passed in the blood, which meant Meyerwin was not a commoner who had happened to learn an old trick. Meyerwin was of the oldest blood there was, the founder's blood. The star blood that ran under the whole obsidian crest, like water under stone, the source, the whole kingdom had grown up on top of and forgotten. The council had looked at her for years and seen a woman with no lineage worth writing down. And the truth she was holding in her two hands by candlelight, was that every noble in that great hall carried a diluted, watered-down trickle of the very thing that ran pure and undiluted in the veins of the healer they had spat on, and in her daughter's veins. Nissa was not a bastard sneaking toward a throne she had no right to. Nissa was the oldest blood in the kingdom come home. Meyerwin closed the book. Her hands were shaking and she made them stop. Because this changed everything, and it changed nothing. It did not matter was the fierce truth that rose up in her, whether Nissa carried the founder's blood, or a laundress's blood, or no famous blood at all. Her daughter was worth loving either way. Her daughter was strong and kind and hers, and that was worth more than every drawn-out lineage in that whole cold hall of sneering wolves. The blood did not make Nissa precious. But the blood Meyerwen thought with the first cold flicker of a plan might just save her life, because if the moonstone truly answered to the founder's blood, and if Nissa carried it pure, then Aldrich's trap had a flaw in it that Aldrich did not know about. Unless Aldrich knew something too. Unless the reason he wanted this trial so badly, the reason he'd been so sure the stone would reject her, was that he had already found a way to make certain it would. The sanctuary, she thought. He wanted the sanctuary. He wanted the child alone in the dark, not to hurt her, to change something. The stone. He wants to get to the stone. She had sealed the sanctuary. But had she sealed the temple 3 doors away in a chamber of her own? Princess Ysolde of the Solar Pack sat awake at her window and watched the same moon. And she was not smiling now. There was a letter in her hands. It had come by rogue courier sealed in black wax with no crest, and she had read it 4 times and her fingers had gone white around the edges of it. The trial is in 3 nights, the letter said in a hand she had learned to dread. You will make certain the Obsidian King is where I need him when I need him. You will smile at his table, and you will keep his eyes on his enemies and off his uncle. Do this, and your sister comes home to you whole. Fail me, princess, and I will send her back to you 1 piece at a time. Isolde closed her eyes. She was not in fact the villain the whole Obsidian court believed her to be. She had not conspired to steal a throne. She had not schemed for the crown. She had come here 6 years ago to marry a man she'd never met for an alliance her father wanted, and she had been humiliated before the whole world when he called it off, and she had gone home in disgrace, and she had thought that was the end of it. Until Aldrich took her little sister. He had done it quietly. A hunting trip, a vanished escort, a letter, and now her sister, 15 years old, gentle, frightened of the dark, was somewhere in the black heart of the Obsidian Citadel, in a cell Ysolde had not been allowed to see, and the only currency that bought her another day of breathing was Ysolde's obedience. So she smiled at the king's table. So she wore her cruelty like a gown, because a cruel princess drew the eye, and while the whole court watched her be terrible, no one watched the old man in the gray. She had looked at Merwin tonight across the hall at the fierce healer with the raised chin and the silver-white daughter, and she had felt something she had no right to feel. Kinship. Because they were both. She understood being moved across the same board by the same cold hand. 2 women. 2 mothers near enough for what was Ysolde to her sister now, but a mother the only shield the child had left. both of them fighting to keep a girl child alive in a game that men like Aldrich played for thrones. She could not warn Merwin, not yet, not with her sister's life hanging on her silence. But she folded the black letter and she held it to the candle and she watched it burn, and somewhere underneath the fear, a small and dangerous thought began to grow. Two of us, she thought, and only one of him. He should not have taken a 15-year-old girl and thought that would make me weak. He should have thought about what a woman will do when there is nothing left to lose. The night before the trial, Meyerwin went to the sanctuary to say goodnight to her daughter. By the terms she herself had set, she could not stay. That was the cruelty of her own clever bargain to keep Nissa safe from Aldrich. She had to leave her alone in the sealed chamber beneath the temple, with only the neutral temple maidens for company, through the longest night of both their lives. Nissa sat very small on the great stone bench in a plain white shift, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her chipped wooden wolf clutched in both hands. "You'll be right outside," the child asked. "Right outside," Myrwin lied gently. "All night, I won't move an inch." She knelt and took her daughter's small face in her hands. "And in the morning you'll touch a special stone and it's going to shine so bright and so beautiful, and everyone in that room is going to see exactly how strong you are. You just have to be brave a little while longer. Can you do that for me?" Nissa nodded, but she did not let go of the wolf. And then she frowned, that deep, grave 5-year-old frown that meant she was working something out, and she tilted her head toward the far wall of the sanctuary, toward the great dark shape of the temple that rose above them in the stone. "Mama," she said slowly. "The stone." "Yes, love, the stone. Not that one." Nissa's golden eyes had gone strange, distant, the way they did sometimes when the blood in her reached for things Merwin couldn't see. "The big one. Up there. In the round room." She pressed the wooden wolf harder against her chest and her lower lip trembled. "Mama, it's crying." Merwin went cold. "What do you mean crying? It's not the right stone anymore." The child's voice had dropped to a whisper, frightened by her own knowing. "It used to sing. I don't know how, I just can. It used to sing like you do, like the light. But now it cries, like something bad is inside it, like it's sick." Her eyes filled. "Mama, I don't want to touch the crying stone." And Myrwin, kneeling on the cold floor of the sanctuary, felt the whole shape of Aldrich's trap click into place at last. He had not needed the sanctuary to reach the child. He had needed the days, the 3 days, the time to get into the temple above to the moonstone itself, and to do the one thing that would turn the trial from a test into an execution. He had swapped the stone, or poisoned it, corrupted it, fed it something dark, some old and rotted magic, so that when Nissa's small hand touched it, it would not read her blood at all. It would simply reach up her arm and drink her dry, and the whole council would watch, and they would call it the judgment of the moon goddess, and they would say the false claim burned the way false claims do, and no one would ever know. No one except a 5-year-old who could hear a stone crying through 3 feet of temple floor. Myrwen gathered her daughter into her arms and held her, and over the small silver head she stared at the dark shape of the temple, and her mind moved fast and cold and clear. She could not prove it, not without touching the stone herself, and if she touched it the trial was forfeit and Nissa was banished. She could not warn the council. They were Aldrich's half of them, and the other half would call her a desperate mother inventing excuses. She could not get to the stone. The temple would be watched. She had sealed herself out of the one room where the danger lived. "Listen to me," she whispered into her daughter's hair. "You clever, clever girl, you listen. Tomorrow when they bring you to the stone, you're going to reach out your hand, and I'm going to be there. I know I said outside, but I'll be right there in the room. I promise you. I will be close enough to touch you." "But the crying." "I know about the crying now. You told me, and because you told me I can help. That's the secret, Nissa. That's the whole secret." She pulled back and looked into her daughter's frightened golden eyes, and she made her voice sure because a mother's sureness is the strongest ward there is. "You are not going into that room alone. Whatever is in that stone, it is going to have to come through me first. And I have been getting through things, my love, my whole life." Nissa searched her mother's face for a long moment. 5 years old and already learning to weigh a promise. Then she nodded and she pressed her wooden wolf into Myrwin's hands. He guards good, she said solemn. You keep him, just for tonight. And Merwin took the battered gray toy and closed her fingers around it and could not speak. The temple maidens came then silent in their pale robes to lead the child to the stone bench for the night. And Myrwin stood and forced her feet to carry her to the door and looked back once. One look at her small daughter alone in the great dark sanctuary, silver hair and white shift, and enormous brave eyes. Then the blood ward sealed behind her with a low hum keyed to the maidens, and the king locking her daughter safely away from Aldrich. And locking her too on the wrong side of the longest night of her life. She climbed the stairs from the sanctuary, with the wooden wolf in her fist, and at the top in the torch-lit corridor, Valor was waiting for her. He had been waiting, she understood the whole time. He said nothing. He only looked at her face and read what was written there, and his own went grave. She hears the stone, Merwin said quietly. Valor, your uncle changed the stone. I can't prove it and I can't stop it, and if I say a word they'll call me a liar and take her anyway. Valor was silent for a long moment. Then he said very low, then we don't stop the trial. What? We can't stop it. You're right. But there's an old law even older than the trial. His golden eyes burned in the torchlight. The parents may stand at the altar, both of them. It's never invoked because it's never needed, but it's written Myrwen. A mother and a father may stand at the stone with the child, to witness, to share what comes. Merwin understood him slowly. To share what comes, she repeated. Whatever that stone reaches for tomorrow. Valor's voice did not shake. It doesn't have to reach only her. If we're both there, if we're touching her, then it has to come through all three of us. And I am a great deal harder to drink dry than a 5-year-old girl. She stared at him. At this man she had spent 6 years hating. This king who had thrown her to the rain to save her life and gotten it wrong and spent 6 years bleeding for it. Who could not make a toy wolf howl? Who had knelt on her clinic floor and said, I don't have the right. You'd stand at that stone, she said slowly, knowing it might turn on you, knowing your own uncle poisoned it, knowing it could take you instead of her. She's my daughter. He said it simply like it was the only fact in the world. I missed 6 years of standing between her and the dark Myrwin. I am not going to miss tomorrow. And Myrwin looked down at the chipped wooden wolf in her hand. He guards good, you keep him. And she looked back up at the father of her child, and she felt the last stone come loose from the wall she had spent 6 years building. She did not tell him she forgave him. She wasn't there yet. She might not be there for a long time. But she said, then we stand at the stone together, all three of us. And somewhere above them in the round dark room at the top of the temple, a corrupted stone sat waiting in the moonlight, crying a song that only a child could hear. And dawn and the blood moon were only hours away. The blood moon rose over the obsidian citadel like a wound in the sky. Not silver, not white, red deep and low and swollen, staining the black spires the color of old iron, throwing a light across the mountain that was not quite light at all, more like the memory of light seen through blood. Merwin watched it climb from the temple steps, and she thought that in 6 years she had never seen a moon look so much like a warning. The great temple of the moon was packed to the rafters. The whole obsidian pack had come nobles in their jeweled finery, elder alphas with their hard, suspicious faces. The common wolves crowded in the back, where they were allowed to stand and watch their betters decide the fate of one small girl. The air was thick with burning myrrh, thick with tension, thick with the collective held breath of 1,000 people who had come, if they were honest, to see whether the stray's daughter would shine or burn. At the center of it all, on a raised platform of white marble, sat the moonstone. It was enormous, a raw crystal of dark obsidian taller than a man, and it pulsed with a slow, deep red light that matched the bleeding moon above. And Myrwen looked at it and heard very faint underneath everything the thing her daughter had heard through 3 feet of stone. It was crying. She had not truly believed it until this moment. Some part of her had hoped Nissa was frightened, imagining that the stone was only a stone. But standing here now with the star blood awake and singing in her own veins, she could hear it too. A low, wrong weeping note under the crystal's pulse, like a voice sealed inside a wall. Oh, you poor thing, she thought, and was surprised to find she meant the stone. What did he put inside you? V. Haller stood beside her in the ceremonial black of the crest, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, his golden eyes fixed on the great bronze doors. He had not slept either. Neither of them had. They had spent the night planning in low voices, and now the plan was the thin and terrible thing it always is at dawn, a hope dressed up as a strategy. The bronze doors groaned open, and the temple maidens led Nissa in. She looked so small. That was the thing that struck the whole hall silent, how small she was, this child at the center of a kingdom's argument. A little girl in a plain white shift, silver hair falling like starlight down her back, walking slowly across the vast marble floor toward a stone that dwarfed her. Her small bare feet made a soft sound on the polished stone. She was not crying. She had left the wooden wolf with her mother. She walked to meet the thing that would decide her life, with her chin lifted exactly the way she had watched her mother walk through the sneering courtyard. That's mine, Merwin thought fiercely, and her eyes burned. That courage, she learned that from me. Whatever else they say about her blood, she has mine. Elder Osric, oldest of the council, rose. His voice filled the temple. Let the child approach the stone. And Aldrich stepped out of the shadows at the edge of the platform. High wore his gray robes and his patient smile, and Meyerwin saw the hunger under it, now naked, because he thought he had already won. She saw his eyes flick once to the moonstone, a small, satisfied, proprietary glance. The look a man gives a trap he has set and knows will spring. If the child is false, Aldrich announced to the hall in a voice heavy with false sorrow, the sacred stone will know it. The blood does not lie. The moon goddess herself will render her judgment. His gray eyes found Merwin across the platform. Let us pray for the child's sake that her mother has not deceived her. You, Merwin thought, looking at him. You would burn a 5-year-old girl alive in front of 1,000 people and call it prayer. Nissa stopped before the great dark crystal. She was so small against it. Her golden eyes went up and up, taking in the whole towering, weeping mass of it, and Meyerwin saw her daughter's hands begin to tremble and saw her steady them deliberately the way she'd been taught. Go on, sweetheart. Merwin's voice carried across the silent hall, clear and warm and sure. Mama's right here. I'm not going anywhere. Reach out your hand. And here is where Aldrich made his second mistake. Because he was so certain, because he had planned so carefully and sealed his corruption into that stone across 3 long nights, and stood now watching his victory unfold, he did not think to stop what came next. He did not think it mattered. Nissa reached out her small hand toward the crying stone, and Meyerwin and Valor stepped up onto the platform beside her. By the old law, Valor said, and his voice rolled out across the temple like distant thunder, the law written before the trial itself, the parents of the child may stand at the stone, to witness, to share what the goddess sends. His golden eyes swept the council, daring a single one of them to speak. We invoke it, both of us, now. Aldrich's smile faltered. That is not, he began. It is written. Elder Osric's ancient voice cut across him, and there was something in it that had not been there before, a flicker of respect maybe, or of doubt. It is old, and it is strange, but it is written. The parents may stand. And before Aldrich could find the words to stop it, Meyerwin knelt beside her daughter and closed her own hand over Nissa's small one, and Valor knelt on the other side and closed his great scarred hand over both of theirs. 3 hands, one reaching for the stone. Together, Meyerwin whispered, and they touched it. The corruption came up out of the stone like a nest of striking snakes. It did not read Nissa's blood. It did not sing or shine or judge. The moment their joined hands brushed the cold, rough crystal, a wave of black, oily, ravening energy exploded outward and wrapped itself around the child's small arm, reaching exactly as Marwin had feared, straight for the life in her. Nissa screamed. The whole hall recoiled. 1,000 voices cried out at once because it looked for one terrible heartbeat exactly like what Aldrich had promised. The stone rejecting a false claim, the goddess's judgment, the burning of a lie. It rejects her, Aldrich's voice rose over the chaos, triumphant ringing to the rafters. The stone rejects the child, she is false, she is a... But the black energy had not reached Nissa, because it had to come through Merwin first. Merwin felt it hit her, like a river of ice, felt it pour up her arm and into her chest, felt the darkness reach hungrily for her soul, and she did the one thing Aldrich had never once accounted for, because he did not know, because no one knew, because the truth had been hidden in a healer's blood for 100 quiet years. She let it in, and then she woke up what was sleeping. The blood of the stars, Myrwan said, and her voice was not her own voice anymore. It had dropped into something deep and resonant and ancient, a frequency that shook the great stone pillars of the temple does not burn. The corruption faltered. It does not judge. It does not devour. The silver mountain lilies in her hair dissolved into sparks of raw light. Her violet eyes flared white, blinding star white, older than the throne, older than the kingdom, older than the stone itself. It binds, it heals, it protects, and it remembers what it is. She turned her hand in the darkness, and the darkness turned silver. Where the black energy had wrapped Nissa's arm, it began to shimmer, to lighten, to change the corruption, bleeding out into pure silver-white fire. The Founder's fire. The oldest light in the world, answering the call of the oldest blood. Awake, Merwin commanded the stone. Remember whose hand you were made to know. And the moonstone cracked. A fissure of blinding silver-white light split the great dark crystal from crown to base, and the corruption that Aldrich had spent 3 nights feeding into it screamed, actually screamed a sound like tearing metal, and then it disintegrated all of it, the whole poison of it blown apart in a silent wave of pure ancient magic that washed outward across the entire temple. The wave touched everyone and harmed no one. It rolled over the nobles and the elders and the common wolves in the back. And where it passed, the red light of the blood moon seemed to lift, to lighten, to remember it had once been silver. Nissa gasped and fell back safe into her mother's arms, entirely unharmed, and her golden eyes, when she opened them, had changed. A ring of pure silver light now circled each pupil. The mark, the old mark, the one Elder Osric knew from the deepest and most forgotten texts of the founding, the mark of the Star Maiden. The temple was utterly silent, and then Elder Osric, oldest of the council keeper of the ancient law, sank to his knees on the marble floor and bowed his white head to the ground before a 5-year-old girl. "The star blood," he whispered, and his voice broke. "The Founder's line. It has returned to us. She is real. She is more than real. She is the oldest of us all." One by one, down the great tiers of the temple, the elder alphas knelt, and in the center of that kneeling hall, Lord Aldrich stood alone. His face had come apart. 6 years of patience, of poison, of careful, quiet scheming, of moving pieces across a board in the dark, all of it gone, disintegrated in a single wave of silver light before the eyes of the entire pack. Merwin watched the mask slide off him at last, and what was underneath was not the cold, smooth lord of the council. It was the boy, the one who had been laughed out of the great hall for his mother's blood, raw and furious and so very, very old in his hurt. "You think you've won?" His voice cracked across the silent temple. "You think this pack will kneel to a witch and her mongrel? You think blood matters? You think it ever mattered? I know what this pack is. I know exactly what they are." He was backing toward the side door now, his hand shaking on his sword. "The solar pack is already at your gates, 10,000 warriors. They will burn this whole rotten citadel to ash, and I will laugh." And that was when the temple bells began to toll. Not the slow, measured beat of ceremony. The frantic, clanging, terrible alarm of an invasion already inside the walls. Bramwell burst through the great doors, armor bloodied. "Sire, the solar pack. They've breached the outer wall. The gates were opened from the inside." Aldrich drew a black horn from his cloak and blew one long, piercing note. And from the side doors of the temple, 50 elite solar warriors poured in, silver-tipped weapons drawn, the kind of weapons made for one purpose, made to kill royal wolves, and the kneeling reverence of a moment before shattered into chaos. "Take the child," Aldrich howled. "Kill the king." Valor was already moving. Merwin the altar, get her behind the altar. But Myrwan had seen something he hadn't. Across the temple on the high gallery, a figure in red gold, Princess Ysolde, standing frozen at the rail. her green eyes not on the battle, but on a small side door, low in the temple wall. A door with a single solar guard in front of it. A door that Isolde was staring at the way a drowning woman stares at shore. Her sister Myrwen thought with sudden and total clarity. That's where they're keeping her sister. That's why she's here. That's why she was cruel. That's the whole shape of it. She grabbed Bramwell's arm as he passed. The gallery door, she said fast. Low in the west wall. There's a girl behind it, Isolde's sister, that's Aldrich's leash on the Solar Princess. Get to it. Break it open. If you free the girl, you cut his hold, and the Solar Pack loses its reason to fight. Bramwell did not stop to ask how she knew. 6 years the king's beta, and he had learned to move when a sure voice told him to. He went. And the battle closed over the temple like a wave. It was carnage and it was fast, and Valor fought through the center of it like the wrath of a god. He had shifted his ceremonial black tearing away as his great midnight wolf emerged, a beast of pure destruction, gold-eyed and enormous, and he tore through the solar warriors between his family and the door, his claws gouging deep tracks in the ancient marble. He fought the way a man fights who missed 6 years of protecting the ones he loves and does not intend to miss a single moment more. But Aldrich had one last card. He drew it from beneath his robes, a crystal small and terrible, glowing a deep pulsing red. Myrwen did not know its name, but she knew its nature the moment she saw it because the star blood in her recoiled from it like a hand from a hot coal. It was an old thing, a dark thing, a relic made to do the one thing that should never be done to a Lycan, to reach inside him and find his wolf and crush it. Aldrich raised it high, and its red light flooded the temple. And Valor's great wolf screamed. It was the worst sound Myrwen had ever heard, worse than the corrupted stone, worse than anything. The massive midnight wolf convulsed, and his body began to shrink, to fold, to shift back against his will. The fur pulling away, the great frame collapsing, until it was only a man on his knees on the bloody marble, gasping, his golden eyes dimming to a dull and human brown, as the relic reached inside him and began slowly to tear his wolf out by the root. "Your wolf is mine, nephew," Aldrich said, and he stepped over the bodies toward the kneeling king, and he raised a silver blade. "And now at last the crown is mine." Myrwen stood at the altar with her daughter's hand in hers, and every instinct she had built over 6 years of survival screamed at her to run, to take Nissa and go through the passage behind the altar out into the night, to save the one thing that was hers to save. She had done it before. She knew how. She could vanish again, raise her daughter in some further safer dark, and let the kings and the lords tear each other apart the way they always did. She looked at Valor on his knees, dying, his wolf being ripped from his body, a process that would kill him in seconds. The star blood in her knew it could feel the bond fraying, could feel him slipping. And she looked at her daughter. And Nissa looked back up at her with her new silver-ringed golden eyes and said in a small, clear voice, "Mama, he's the one from the story, isn't he? The Silver King with the locked-up heart." Merwin's breath caught. "He came to find us," Nissa said. "You said the man in the story found what he lost. Don't let the bad man take him away again." And Myrwen, who had spent 6 years teaching herself that she needed no one, that she and her daughter were enough, that love was a door you could close and lock and walk away from, heard her own child hand her back the thing she had been most afraid to want. She let go of Nissa's hand. "Stay behind the altar," she said. "No matter what you hear, just like we practiced." She kissed her daughter's silver head hard, fast. "You're the bravest girl I ever knew. Now I'm going to be brave too." And she stepped out onto the bloody platform. "Aldrich." Her voice cut across the temple, and it carried that ancient resonance, still the star blood ringing under it, and the dark mages of the Solar Pack froze where they stood. Aldrich turned the silver blade poised over his nephew's neck. "Ah," he said. "The witch, come to watch him die. You want the crown?" Merwin walked toward him across the marble, unhurried, her hands beginning to glow. "You've wanted it your whole life. Since you were a boy they laughed at. Since they told you your mother's blood made you nothing." She saw the flinch. She had aimed for it and she hit it. "I know that wound, Aldrich. I've carried the twin of it for 6 years. They looked at me and saw no lineage, no name, the same words they said over you." "Don't!" His voice shook. You don't know, you don't get to. But here's what you never understood. She was close now, close enough to see the boy behind the ruin of the man. The wound was never the truth about you. It was only ever the truth about them, about small people who measure a soul by its bloodline because they've got nothing else to measure with. You could have proved them wrong just by being better than they said you were. Instead, you spent 40 years trying to prove them right. That the crown was worth a child's life. That blood was worth everything. Her hands blazed brighter. You let their cruelty become your own. And that is the only thing that ever made you nothing. For one moment, one single moment, something flickered in Aldrich's gray eyes. Something young and lost and almost reachable. And then it closed. Because 40 years is a long time to be angry, and some men choose the wound over the healing every time. Touch him, Aldrich snarled, and I finish him where he kneels. I'm counting on it, said Merwin, and she slammed her burning hands down onto Valor's chest. What she did had a name in her grandfather's grimoire, and the name was the Soul Melt, and there was a warning written beside it in her grandfather's cramped and careful hand: do not attempt this working unless the alternative is death, for it is death's near neighbor. To bind your life force to another's is to share whatever crushes them. If their darkness is too deep, it will take you down as well. The old texts give it one chance in two. One chance in two. Meyerwin had done the arithmetic in the long night before the trial, sitting with the book, and she had decided she could live with those odds because the alternative was watching him die and teaching her daughter that love was a thing you saved yourself from. The magic tore into her. She had thought she understood pain. She had crossed the mountains in labor. She had buried her grandfather. She had walked out of this citadel with her heart in pieces. She had not understood pain at all, because now his pain poured into her, all of it all at once, 6 years of it. She felt the numb cold hearth where the bond had been. She felt the slow poison his uncle had fed him day after day after day for years. She felt the crushing, endless iron loneliness of a crown worn by a man who had thrown away the only warmth he'd ever known and could tell no one why. She felt his wolf, his great, magnificent wolf, howling in a prison of dark red glass, being crushed, being drowned, being torn from him inch by screaming inch. And underneath all of it, threaded through the whole 6 years, like a single unbroken silver wire, she felt one thing that never dimmed and never died, and never once in all that dark went out. Her name, her face, the memory of her. He had held on to her through all of it. The one warm thing in 6 years of cold. Oh, she thought, breaking, oh, you stubborn, foolish, faithful man. Shatter it, her mind screamed, and it was a mother's scream and a mate's scream and a healer's scream all at once. Shatter the glass, give him back to himself. And with the last of everything she had, Meyerwin broke the prison. The relic in Aldrich's hand, the heart of the eclipse, the crushing crystal exploded into a million harmless burning shards. And Valor's eyes flared open, and they were not brown, and they were not only gold. They were gold and silver both, fused, blazing. The king's blood and the founder's light burning together, in a man who had just been pulled back from the edge of death by a woman who chose the harder odds. He stood. And he did not shift into his wolf. He shifted into something older, a great silver-furred direwolf of the ancient founders, twice the size of any wolf in that hall. His presence so vast and so dominant that the 50 solar warriors simply dropped their weapons and fell to their faces on the marble, unable to stand against a thing that old. Aldrich stumbled back, his ruined trap smoking in his hand, his face white. "No," he said. "No, this isn't the blood was supposed to." And across the temple a door burst open. Bramwell came through it, and behind him, blinking in the light, terrified and alive, was a girl of 15 with red gold hair. And on the high gallery, Princess Isolde saw her sister whole free, and something in the Solar Princess broke open and remade itself in a single instant. "The alliance is broken," Isolde's voice rang out over the whole temple, clear and fierce and free at last. "Solar warriors, stand down. He held my sister as a hostage against your honor and mine. Aldrich of Obsidian has no hold on us. Lay down your blades." The solar pack already flat on the marble before the direwolf king needed no second telling. The invasion collapsed in the space of a breath, not defeated, but freed the leash cut the reason for the fight simply gone. Aldrich was alone. He turned to run, and there was nowhere to run, and the great silver direwolf that had been his nephew turned its ancient gold and silver eyes upon him. But it was not Valor who stopped him, it was Marwen. She rose from where she'd fallen beside the altar, scarred hands smoking exhausted to the marrow, and she lifted one hand not to strike him, to hold him. A working of pure silver light wrapped around the old lord and held him fast, gentle and absolute, the way you might hold a wounded animal that keeps trying to bite. "No," she said when she saw Valor's great wolf gather to strike. "Not like that. He doesn't get to die a villain in a story and let everyone off easy. He gets to hear it first." She walked to Aldrich, held in her silver light, and she looked into the gray eyes of the boy who had been laughed out of the great hall 60 years ago. "You were never nothing," she told him quietly. "Just for him. They were wrong about you the same way they were wrong about me. Your mother's blood was never your shame. It was theirs for not seeing what was in front of them." Her voice did not waver. "You could have been the one to break the whole rotten idea. You had the chance. Instead, you carried their poison for 60 years and fed it to a child. That's the tragedy of you, Aldrich. Not your blood, your choices." And for one last moment, the gray eyes filled with something that might in another life have been the beginning of grief. Then the council guards took him, and the great hall watched the fallen lord led away in silver light, and there was no cheering. Only a strange and heavy quiet, the quiet of 1,000 people who had just been shown all at once the true cost of the thing they'd all believed that blood was worth more than a soul. 1 month later, the great cathedral of the citadel was full again. But there were no whispers this time. No talk of strays or bastards or questionable blood. The council had been remade cleaned of Aldrich's people filled with alphas, who had knelt in the temple and seen the Founder's light with their own eyes and understood at last what they had nearly thrown away. Merwin stood before the grand altar in a gown of deep midnight and shimmering silver, and beside her stood Valor, and between them on a small stool that had been placed there specially sat a 5-year-old girl in a tiny circlet of mountain lilies swinging her feet and holding a chipped wooden wolf. Elder Osric came forward with 2 crowns. He placed the heavy black iron crown of the obsidian crest upon Valor's head, and then he turned and lifted the second crown, the old one, the silver one, the one that had not been brought out of the deep vaults in 100 years, because there had been no one worthy to wear it, the star crown of the founding line, and he placed it on Merwin's head. "I present to you," Elder Osric said, and his old voice carried to the very back of the cathedral where the common wolves stood no longer at the back at all now, but woven through the whole crowd, King Valor and Queen Myrwen, co-rulers of the Obsidian Crest, not one above the other, not crown above bond, but equals as the founders intended and as we forgot. He bowed his white head. "May their reign teach us to measure a soul by better things than blood." The cathedral erupted, and Valor turned to his queen and took her scarred hand in his, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all, because everything that mattered had already been said in a ruined clinic on a mountain road at a bloody altar. "You could have run," he said quietly under the cheering. "At the altar, when I was dying. You could have taken her and gone and no one would have blamed you. You'd already given 6 years to surviving. Why didn't you run?" Myrwen looked down at their daughter, at Nissa, who had climbed off her stool and wrapped an arm around each of their legs, her silver head tipped back, her silver-ringed golden eyes shining up at them both. "Because a long time ago," Merwin said, "I walked out into the rain to teach a lesson to people who thought a woman with no name was worth nothing." She lifted her chin and the star crown caught the light. "And it took me 6 years and a great many mistakes to learn the last part of it. That I'm not worth nothing because of what runs in my blood, and I'm not worth everything because of it either. I'm worth what I choose, what I stand for, who I stand beside when it costs me." She met his gold and silver eyes. "I chose to stay, not because you're a king, because you knelt on my floor and told me the truth even when it damned you. That's the man I stayed for, not the crown." Nissa tugged on her mother's gown. "Mama," she said, "can I show them the light now, the pretty one? There's no window here. You said windows were the problem." And Myrwan looked around the cathedral at the remade council, at the kneeling nobles, at the common wolves who had come to see a girl crowned, who had once been called a plague, and she laughed a real laugh, the first fully free laugh in 6 long years. "Yes, my love," she said. "There's no danger here anymore. Show them everything." And Nissa lifted her small hands, and between her fingers bloomed a globe of light, not hidden, not extinguished, not feared. Silver blue and brilliant, it rose up out of a child's cupped palms and floated up into the great vaulted dark of the cathedral, spreading brightening until it hung above them all like a small new star, and 1,000 upturned faces were washed in its gentle light. A healer who had been thrown to the rain, a king who had learned to kneel, a little girl who had never once been a bastard, only a treasure the world had failed to recognize, and the light of the oldest blood in the kingdom shining down at last on a court that had finally learned to look. She overheard the king choose another, and she left without a goodbye. But she came back, not as a captive, not as a lesson, not as a woman grateful for the scraps of a man's affection. She came back as an equal and a savior and a queen, and she taught an entire kingdom that a person's worth was never written in their blood at all. It was written in what they chose to do with their one wild, precious, unrepeatable heart.